Hey guys, so this is going to be a super laid back, chill video about Xavier Gipson getting cut from the Jets. Now, what does this mean in the short term? It means we're going to need guys to replace him in the returning game, most importantly, but also in the wide receiver room. That being said, originally we were going to make this 45-second short, post it to YouTube, because I didn't think there was a lot that had to be said about this. But the more and more I think about this, the more and more I notice some similarities in actions by Darren Muji and Aaron Glenn throughout a few players they moved on from. And I think it tells you a lot about what this new GM and head coach want for their vision for the New York Jets. I'm gonna point to two other guys who the Jets moved on from. One of them was the biggest question when Muji and Glenn were hired to the Jets. It was the number one storyline. Are you going to move on from Aaron Rodgers? And they made the decision to move on from Aaron Rodgers, a very controversial one, and one that I don't think there really was a right or wrong answer. I think moving on from him makes sense in many ways. Keeping him makes sense in many ways as well. For me, the biggest question with Rodgers was about the team you were trying to build. Are you trying to kind of start from the ground floor, build this team up using those young players as your foundational pillars, or do you want to try to keep that experiment, the Rodgers to New York experiment, going for another season, see if you can make that work? And I think at the time, that was probably the leading decision made by Muji and Glenn. But I can't help but thinking Aaron Rodgers, since he's been on the Jets, for better or for worse, has been in every single news headline every single week. Like he was the number one storyline for the Jets for those couple of years, and there was always some controversy, always something he was saying on some podcast, usually McAfee's podcast. There was always something going on behind the scenes with Rodgers. And it created a locker room that had a lot of issues. A lot of things were getting out, leaked to the media, things that hurt the locker room of the Rob Saleh era. And I think Aaron Glenn's decision, as I assume he and Muji were both on the same page with this for such a big decision it was, I assume that decision came from the locker room, especially looking at some other guys they moved on from, Malachi Corley being the next one. Now, Malachi Corley, he was hyped up by the last GM, the last coaching staff that was in here. He was supposedly the fourth best wide receiver in that draft class, right? That was a stacked draft class, and he's number 4 apparently, right? They had him above Robinson, right? It was crazy. But despite all that, they move on from Malachi Corley. They move on from the hype. Now, Malachi Corley, what has he done in that locker room? Well, I think he had 2 or 3 receptions all season. There was only one I could think of off the top of my head, and that was the 10-plus touchdown run that never was, because Malachi Corley celebrates a little bit too early, drops the ball, rolls out of the end zone, becomes a safety, so should have been plus 6 points. Instead, we're giving the other team 2 points. So pretty big mistake there by him. In a big moment, Malachi Corley, but he also refused to play special teams. He wasn't really a team player. He seemed to have a bit of an attitude issue, and the Jets decided to move on from him. Now, Gipson did not have any of that, right? He didn't have an attitude issue, but he had a big issue with fumbles, and that was another thing that Muji and Glenn especially talked about in his intro press conference. It was about, let's reduce the silly mistakes. Take off the penalties. We don't need penalties. We're not a team that's good enough to have a player or two who are giving us 2-3 penalties a game. We can't afford that. We're the Jets. We're not the Chiefs, right? We can't take Jawan Taylor. We need to get rid of that. That was one of the big questions, and we've seen Glenn make some pretty big moves for that. I remember Michael Clemens getting benched. There was another player, a linebacker, who got benched in preseason in a game they were expected to have a lot more snaps. Glenn takes that back because of a silly mistake that led to a penalty. With Gipson, the issue has always been the drops, the muffed punts, right? He has had 10 of them, including the one this season in the Steelers game. And I think Gipson, for the most part, has just been an average or below average returner. If you look at his yardage, both on punt and kick returns, he is below the average player, right? So he wasn't bringing you that much. He has these drops issues. And yesterday, a statement came out from Aaron Glenn where he used one word: accountability. And that is what this video is really about. It's about accountability. Because Rodgers, in many ways, he was the leader of the locker room. He was the leader of the team. Rob Saleh was playing second fiddle for most of that last season up until he got fired. And then after Rob Saleh got fired, it was Rodgers' team. I don't think anyone is really arguing against that. Jeff Ulbrich never really did that much to say, this is my team, putting his stamp down on the Jets. Rodgers was always the guy when you look at that sideline who was leading things week in, week out. We saw Rodgers being the guy, the leader over his coaches. And that makes so much sense now, right? You're a first-time head coach. I don't want that coming from a player. Even if he's my star player, I can have that. Let's be accountable. Move on from him. We want a structure. We want a quarterback who's going to listen to us. Moving on from Rodgers, boom. Malachi Corley, he had attitude issues. He refused to play special teams. We had that with guys in the past too, right? Guys who would either refuse to play special teams or refuse to play certain positions. Mekhi Becton refused to play guard for us. Then goes to the Eagles after he hits rock bottom. Turns out he was really good at playing guard. Now he's with the Chargers. Mekhi Becton was such a big issue, right? He was a guy who Rob Saleh was not able to control. If he was able to control Mekhi Becton, mold him into a guard for the Jets, you could have had a starting level guard there. You lose that all from that former first round pick. Let's say with Malachi Corley, that's the direction Glenn and Muji think he's going in. Move on from him, right? He doesn't want to do special teams, not for the Jets, right? Gipson, a different type of accountability. He was making those silly mistakes that Glenn put his foot down on when he got onto the Jets, when he was made the head coach and said, we're going to eliminate these types of mistakes. He had 9 of them the last 2 seasons, but now he has a big one that cost us the game. It did cost us the game against the Steelers in opening week, against Aaron Rodgers in such a big moment. Accountability, let's get rid of him. Now, for the second part of the video, I want to talk a little bit more about Gipson himself. To start off, I know it sounds like I'm going kind of hard on Gipson, but I want to be very clear in saying I really appreciate what he gave us, what he gave the Jets. He was a UDFA, right? One of those guys, those scrappy guys who barely make the roster, and he was able to prove his worth at a few times for the Jets. The biggest one really was exactly 2 years ago. Today's 9/11/2025. This was 9/11/2023. Opening week, Monday Night Football against the Bills. Rodgers goes down on the 4th snap, I believe. The game seems lost. We're able to take it to overtime, and then in overtime, Xavier Gipson has the touchdown off the kickoff, I believe, or maybe a punt, but he has a return touchdown, saves the game, and the Jets had a pretty good start to the season. I think we were 3-3. I remember we almost beat the Chiefs, and then we beat the Eagles the next week. It was a good time, and Gipson was such a big part of that time of being a Jets fan. That specific memory, that play, will live in my memory forever. Like, it was such a fun time. I was with my friends at the basement in our dorm at college. And yeah, like, just the excitement, the craziness of that Gipson gave me and gave other Jets fans, I will never forget. So thank you, Xavier Gipson, for giving us that memory. Outside of that, Xavier Gipson didn't really have any major moments. He did step in a couple times as a wide receiver. And in terms of his playing quality, he was never really a great wide receiver. I liked him in some run concepts. I thought he showed some promise there, but we really didn't see that much going on with Nate Hackett last year. I think they just moved off that altogether. But for when he was playing run concepts, I think that's something for wherever he ends up next to keep in mind. He was good in those run concepts. Going to returning, again, he was below average in both punt and kick return yardage. He also only had 1 touchdown the entire time. Like, it wasn't like he had a few touchdowns. He was stringing together a career where he's making an impact every single season. There was definitely a lot of mistakes too with those 9 fumbles and muff punts over the last 2 years, right? That's a good amount of fumbles and muff punts for a guy who's not getting to touch the ball that often. But now, moving on from that, I want to talk about what the Jets are going to look like in terms of the wide receiver room looking forward, as well as the returner jobs. The returner job is the much simpler answer. Kenny Nwangwu is a guy who we have on the roster. He was injured. Maybe he returns soon. I believe he missed practice today, so he's not 100% right now. But hopefully by the time Sunday gets around, he's fully healthy and he could play Only thing is he only does kick returns. He doesn't do punt returns. Bit of an issue there, but here's why I think it's not as much of an issue. Going into preseason, I thought Xavier Gipson was going to be on the roster. I didn't see a guy who could do the same things as him at the same level, but I saw that throughout preseason with Jamal Pritchett. Now, Pritchett had a muffed punt or a fumble, I can't remember what it was, but some big mistake in the third preseason game that, in my opinion, probably led to him getting cut. I think there was a decent chance he made the roster without that mistake. But overall, I think Pritchett and Gipson are about the same player. Like they're the same level. They do about the same things. So I say take Jamal Pritchett, bring him up onto the roster, let him come to game day, let him take your punt returns, see what he can do. If he isn't working out that well, you have a few other guys on the practice squad, and it's not too hard to find a returner in free agency. Even at this point in the season, a lot of those guys return. Most teams carry 2 or 3 returners through preseason. So a lot of teams did cut 1 or 2 of those guys. Maybe the Jets can find their answer as a diamond in the rough, but that's not very likely, of course. I think Jamal Pritchett and Kenny Nwangwu taking the returner roles from Gipson makes the most sense. I also like to point out that Gipson wasn't supposed to take the kick returns. It was supposed to be Nwangwu from the beginning. Nwangwu gets injured early on in the game, and that's why Gipson had to take the kick returns. Just another thing to keep in mind there. And now there's only one thing to talk about with Xavier Gipson left, and that's the wide receiver room. Now, the first thing to understand is that he was never expected to have a big role on the Jets. He was always supposed to be a guy who maybe you bring onto the field for 2 or 3 snaps a game. You try to see if he can get played in as a second or third option, and maybe once every 3 or 4 weeks, you give him a design play to see if he can have a breakout play using his speed. But for the most part, he wasn't expected at any point to be a part of that Jets wide receiver room, at least not as a top 3, top 4 receiver. Now, moving on from that, I do think Jamal Pritchett, who we talked about earlier as a replacement for Gipson as a returner, can have that sort of role on the Jets. Now, I would rather have, if we're talking about practice squad guys, either Brandon Smith or Quentin Skinner make it. I think they both show me more in the wide receiver position. But if you're bringing Pritchett onto the roster as a returner, might as well have him do the same job. I don't think there's that much of a difference between Pritchett and Gipson, nor between Pritchett and Brandon Smith or Pritchett and Skinner in terms of what they can bring to the Jets. Thank you for your time. Thanks for listening to this video. Leave a comment below about what you think Gipson will do next in the NFL. Personally, I think he will have at least 1 or 2 more chances around the league. I think he's shown enough in his short time in the NFL to get those 1 or 2 extra chances. But yeah, have a great day. Bye.